Hello friends, and welcome to this video. Today I want to talk about a compact Lancelot, which is half the size, volume, with the same drivers as my last cabinet, and I'm gonna talk to you about a couple of things today. There's quite a lot. First of all, the sonic changes that happened by using a smaller cabinet, which are quite surprising. It's of course a much more acceptable size, and so I think if you have had a look at Janos, who created the Voice of Lancelot concept, and he built it and he optimized it, you might be a bit daunted by its size. And I think there's an alternative. So we're going to talk about that. I'm also going to talk about some potential different drivers. So if you don't have access, or shipping and importing is prohibitively expensive for you, I think there are some alternatives that you can consider. Now, they're unproven as yet. I'll post probably next week. I get a modern compression driver, so we're going to trial that in this cabinet, but I'll deal with that in a separate video. Now, the other thing is I'm going to talk about is distortion, the auditability of the types of distortion that create auditability, and how an active cabinet like this, which doesn't have any damping, what it does, how it works for you. So, and finally, I'll also get into the exact dimensions of this cabinet and some of its qualities. So a lot to go through. So first of all, what are we doing? We're making an active cabinet, and let me sum up a couple of things of Janos's idea, and I hope I can be complete here. So, first of all, what we're trying to do is now let's get into distortion first. So there's a couple of things. Linear distortion. So linear distortion is best visualized as the frequency response. So if you have any peaks or dips in it, our auditory system is most sensitive to peaks, and dips a little bit less. So dips, and a lot of it is actually relatively related to each other. So it's not an absolute level. It's more that the low tones on the frequency spectrum relate to each other. So if it goes slightly all down or slightly all up, those things are far less noticeable to us. Dips are also far less noticeable to us, but they'll show up in specific recordings where you hear that something is recessed. Peaks, however, are... So if we bring that element back to speaker design, what we want, I think, is choose drivers that have a relatively flat response. That way, our crossover can be as simple as possible and interferes least with the sound. So that's one thing. Let's talk about non-linear distortion. Now, certain Mr. Geddes, Dr. Geddes, has done quite recent research on this, which hasn't been refuted, and he basically discovered, to his dismay actually, but he discovered that non-linear distortion is almost a non-issue in speakers, and we're talking about harmonics, and the problem is that our ear produces so much harmonic distortion and filters that out that we're actually very insensitive to harmonic distortion, and which is completely opposite, because almost any audio company in the world in the last 80 years have specified THD, and there is zero scientific evidence how that correlates to perceived audio quality. So it is a metric that is universally used that is absolutely irrelevant to what you're hearing. However, over time, and I think the problem was already detected in 1937, the RCA wrote about it in their handbook, about that it was completely useless. And since then, of course, people have been looking at better ways of things that are audible. Now, the things that are audible, and the masking effect you have to sort of see like this. So it means that if you hear a tone, say we have a 1 kilohertz tone, what you often get is, off that tone you get the harmonics, so the 2 kilohertz, the 3 kilohertz, and the 4 kilohertz. And you also have, by the way, the half and the quarter and so on of that. Now what happens is that our masking sort of runs like this, which means everything that is underneath that curve can't be heard. So if your second harmonic, your third harmonic, and so on is under that curve of your masking profile, if you will, you can't hear it. Now, generally, speakers produce a dynamic, at least dynamic speakers produce a shitload of that distortion relatively to other components. However, they're completely inaudible. But if that happens, for example, in your amp and you have higher harmonics, for example, through intermodulation, distortion, or those things, or specific cancellations, or those harmonics are not in a natural order. For example, you have very high third and fifth, or only before, for example, second and fourth, but not the third. Those things are also audible because they don't follow the masking pattern. So now there's not too much that we can do with it, with speakers, the design, but it's a thing that comes more into component design like amps, where it does feature prominently. In speakers, it's almost irrelevant, unless on ginormous levels. Then there's a third factor, and which has more to do with phase and being out of phase, where those harmonics are out of phase or they're slightly delayed. I think what's happening with our ear is that if harmonic distortions are delayed, and that, for example, that could, or a reverse phase, which could be with edge diffractions, with early reflections that reaches within sort of 40 milliseconds. If it happens with that, if we get these refractions in phase or harmonic distortions that are actually delayed, then our ear will pick up at it. And the thing is, because our ear, I think, is very specialized in saying, okay, we need to discard all this thing because it's actually the same original source. However, if something is a little bit delayed, what happens is that that must be a new thing, a thing by itself, and our ear will hone into it. It will start paying attention to it. It won't discard it like normal harmonic distortion. So what we want in a speaker design is actually that delayed signal, those refractions, things where the phase inverts, those things start getting notable. And this is in speaker design you want to address. So if you, for example, apply damping like most cabinets today, and you do MDF, and you do, what you get is any resonances left. For example, with damping material, all that energy that goes to the back that you won't hear, you got the half of the energy going forward, half to the back, will come back muddled and delayed, and then will get out. Now that's the type of distortion that you can actually hear. Now you might prefer it, you might be used to it, just like you get used to a room acoustics. You know, you go to a new house, you move house. First nights you always hear everything so different because you're not used to it. Later that gets filtered out. So same happens with audio. When you're always used to a bass lift, you will be used to a bass lift, and it takes years to wean yourself off it. So these things happen. So, however, what an active cabinet does is tries to actually beam back that energy that went to the back and use it for a good purpose. And it needs to do that as fast as possible. So you don't want standing resonances, and you don't want that bounce around in the box, because they'll stay forever. And for example, if you look at a void pipe, one of the nice things is, because it's a tapered triangle, there's not going to be a standing resonance. It's going to bounce around before you know, from the front to the back and so on, because it's the geometry prevents it. So similar, if you use wood, which by the way has a much higher speed of sound, the speed of sound in wood is much higher than air, you actually have a chance to transferring that energy out to a different surface, for example, and beaming it out very quickly. So that can actually help with that type of distortion that I just talked about, with time smearing delays or refractions. So if we can use the cabinet in a positive way, like an instrument, that energy can actually dissipate really quickly and therefore does not get noticed by your ear. And one of the things you need for that is high quality wood. So this speaker cabinet is actually not that high. It does, I'll talk about the geometry in a sec, but this speaker doesn't have that have very good quality wood, and therefore if it starts resonating, compared to my last speaker at least, it's slightly worse because I reused an older cabinet, but there are some advantages here. And the reason is because this cabinet is smaller, it probably the active contributing element of active panels are I think a little bit less efficient. However, the quality, and because the panels are smaller, they vibrate less, or they keep resonating not as long. So I think if you use a lower grade wood, having these smaller panels actually works into your advantage. Now the other thing is, this also has a divider in there, so it's actually a folded void pipe. So it has a divider running here from the back here, and the port is in the white section, just like a void pipe, and actually exits on the floor. And these two woofers prevent something else that is normally happened with a tapered cabinet, is that you actually get combing effects in the response. And that's particularly bad. Usually what people then do is put stuffing in it, and that will mellow out those particular combing effects. And that's usually advised in a void pipe. However, this one doesn't have it, but what it does have is two woofers in different positions in the pipe. And that by itself creates that we get these peaks and troughs basically start overlapping each other and cancelling each other out. Now they're not ideally positioned because I worked with an old cabinet. Ideally this should have been a little bit more up, but it's working very well, I can tell you. It's better than a single driver cabinet. So the other feature is a standard feature of the voice of Lancelot that is, I think, pioneered by Jean Hiraga, and that is that by having the port coupled to the floor, you get an extra bass lift, which means that despite the bass being tuned relatively low, we get the uplift where the bass port, an uplift of about 6 extra decibels, because the port is connected to the floor, and that means the loss is less, which improves the bass efficiency, and sorry. And that means that we can actually tune the cabinet lower and use a smaller size cabinet to get the same bass response. So that's another thing going on. So we got the geometry. Now let's talk about the smaller size. So the smaller size is interesting. What I noticed is that the impulse response and probably the step response with having this tapered quarter wave cabinet, but also the half the size of the cabinet, the sound now is far less recessed and lazy. The bass doesn't resonate as much. It's much tighter controlled, and combined with the compression driving facing slightly forward, what I noticed is that the sound is now, rather than being, for example, a row 40 concert thing where it just fills the room lazily, now it really starts projecting forward. And the matching between the character of the compression driver and the woofers is much better. Like they now have a similar beaming effect. So is that very advantageous? It depends on what you want. And so if you want that projection or you want a stereo image, I would say this setup, if you love stereo imaging, I can't test it because I don't have a stereo pair here, but I'd say this would be very good in producing a very sharp yet spacious stereo image with this setup. Also, I think because we made it a little bit less directional, I think I've got less reflections from the side. So I'm preventing the directionality of these two 12 inches. And by the way, you could also use one 15 inch. I think that's, if you get a modern driver, we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But if you get single 15 inch, you get a bit of a beaming effect from this. And I think in the lower reaches, because of the agitation of room modes, I actually I think there's some advantage to having a bit more directionality. I feel it actually clears up the sound that comes out of it. So anyway, it projects extremely well. It projects towards you, even if you're standing 5-6 meters away. It feels really close. The speaker, it feels like it projects forward towards you. So, and that's definitely by halving the size of the cabinet. So I'm here. I've got 170 liters. It's definitely a very noticeable change, and also in combination with my new amp, I'm getting a really, you know, if it is asked for in the music, I get a really dry bass. You know, if you get a rumbling bass, it's a rumbling bass, but at least now it has the capability of producing slam and really punchy kick drum or something. It now comes out with this type of cabinet. So that's the complete advantage by itself, I think, of moving to a smaller cabinet. Yeah, I think that's it about the sonic changes for this cabinet. Now, modern driver equivalents. Oh, I will first go into the dimensions and then I'll get to the modern drivers. So dimensions, just for those of you who are interested, this is a 170 liter box. The tapered pipe is about 2 meters long. There's a little bit extra room left in the top, so you can actually put a sort of a waveguide inside if you want. It's not really needed from the research that I've done. And it also sort of discounts the space that the compression driver takes. So it's a little bit too high. But anyway, it runs from 3/4 of an inch there to about 44 centimeters, which is about 18 millimeters, and it runs all the way. It expands, so from the back goes to the front, and the port is on this side, and it expands to about 1 foot 4 inches, I think it is. So 44 centimeters. But the width of the cabinet is 39.1 centimeters. And the depth of the cabinet inside, so these are inside dimensions, is 46.4 centimeters. The height at the front is about 1 meters 8, and at the back it's 1 meters 18. So that means that if you have a, you know, your normal size 122 by 244 panels, that you can actually sort of saw this out quite economically. And then the height, well, this is probably about, I'm not sure what it is, but it's probably 40 centimeters from the top where it's positioned. Okay, if you do a 15 inch, by the way, then you would have to widen the cabinet probably to 43 centimeters and make it a bit less shallow. And again, you should actually always design for the driver that you're going to apply. Now, let's get to modern drivers. I'm going to try a new compression driver, and I'll give you one that you could also consider, which I've heard is a very good replacement for the Altec, and I'll tell you why. So I'm going to try the SB Audience Rosso CDN 65 CDNT. So it's a 65 millimeter compression driver. The diaphragm, I think it has a 1.4 inch port. I'm not entirely sure. This one is 2 inch. And that one has a flat frequency response from 500 Hertz to 17 kilohertz, and then it sort of drops off a little bit to 20 kilohertz. But it has an enormously flat range with very little issues. Joseph Crow actually reviewed it. He really liked it, especially when driven with a tube amp. So I'm gonna try that soon, and I think that will be a very affordable replacement, but it'll be in a separate video how that will actually compare to this one. Now, this one that I'm using, the Electrovoice DH1A, very good, very efficient, very heavy. However, its frequency response runs a little bit like this, and you need to then compensate it with the crossover, which is just not ideal. So it'll be really interesting to hear about. Now, as an alternative driver, I would suggest the Fatal Pro 15 PR400. That is a 15 inch driver. It's 99 decibels efficient. By the way, I didn't speak about efficiency. I have to talk about that in a second. Why you want to do this whole cabinet thing, because efficiency is a major influence on that. So that's 99 decibels efficient, which is the same as these two combined. The volume that it likes to work with, it will operate really well in this 170 liter cabinet. And not only that, it is actually, its internal structure, the way the magnet is very similar to an Alnico driver like these. So it has a neodymium slug as magnet, which means that the magnetic structures, apart from the magnet type, will actually be very similar to a Alnico driver of the old days. It has a similar structure. The only hesitance that I have is that it's a very PA driven system, because so I'll tell you the pro and the con that I've for my research. The con could be that it's a 400 watt continuous driver, and that it has features built inside that might not work with a low power tube amp. I don't know that. It could be completely superfluous, but you know, it's fair for me to share it with you. Then if we're gonna but what on the positive side, I've seen a lot of people on you know, DIY audio forum and so on, see that it is actually a very good replacement for an Altec, a modern production Altec. So, and by the way, the budget will be a lot friendlier. So have a look at that. If you're gonna build with it, or you have built it with it, let me know in the comments. It'll be very interesting to hear from you. I'm not gonna try it because I've got Altec 515s and I've got these Altec 414s. So I'm probably not going to bother with it, but I am going to bother with the compression driver. If it doesn't work, I might have to try an Altec and just save up for that. So many competing priorities. Okay, final topic before we end this video, because we're... I can't even see how long we're in, but 22 minutes. Okay. Well, efficiency. So one of the major aspects of the Lancelot design is also efficiency. This is why we use these high efficiency Altecs that have very low FS, so very low self-resonance frequencies. This means they can extend low, are very efficient, and we're using some of these efficiency to get a better bass response. The cabinet is also designed for that. So I mentioned the port boost. The active cabinet also might add, you know, probably in this design, probably a bit less than Janus's design, but it could also add, you know, maybe 1.5 decibels or something to the efficiency. And of course, what do we get with efficiency? Well, usually all distortion in speakers is related to the amount of current in the voice coil. So all dynamic drive type drivers have that effect. And it's actually cubically related. So if you increase double the current, your distortion generally goes ×4. Well, you can do some, of course, there are technologies that you can use to reduce that effect, such as, you know, copper shorting rings, other design features that try to stop that force of nature behind it. But generally, that's what you're dealing with. So when you go up in efficiency, you get less distortion, which is not that much of an issue anyway, but you get less distortion. And what I find is you get much better articulation at lower levels. And with higher levels, you get less compression, because most dynamics, especially low efficiency drivers, the voice coil heats up, you get eddy currents. All of those will work against the current and will actually see that your peaks. And then after the peak also you have a residual heat, and that cools then down, and then you get your next peak and so on. All that effect will go into your, will actually deliver compression. High efficiency drivers have that way less, because there's hardly any current running. Also then your crossover components are hardly, there's very little current running through them, so they operate much more efficiently. The whole power thing gets taken, the sacrifices that you need to make for power are being removed, including, and this is especially for the people that love tube amps, is actually that the compromises you make, or the number of stages you have in your tube amp. So it becomes a win-win situation that you can simplify your amplifier design, and you have, the crossover is less compromised, you get less compression and distortion, you get better articulation. So that is why you want to raise the efficiency and you want to have very highly efficient things. So this speaker is probably 101 decibels efficient. I haven't measured it exactly, but I would sort of guess it. And I'm losing quite a bit of efficiency from that. That one is of course 110 decibels per watt efficient, and these are 96. But because of their parameters, they actually perform really close to that, unlike the Altec 515, where you lose a little bit of efficiency in most situations. However, if you go to that Fatal Pro driver, you also have a very high efficient driver. If you combine it with that SP Audience Rosso, which is highly efficient, I think 109 decibels per watt, you have all the ingredients to produce a highly efficient thing, and then you'll be enjoying the building of your, for example, a tube amp or a very low, maybe, you know, a first watt, a very small single-ended solid state device or so to power your system, and you won't need many watts. So that's it for this video. This is the compact Lancelot. I really like it. It's almost like a, in closing, if you're still here, in closing, this cabinet is really a, sort of almost an audiophile PA system is the way it sounds like. It has this really tight control bass. It also extends really nicely, better than a PA, I would say. And just a really nice audiophile, sharp quality. Basically anything that I am able to throw at it with my tube amp designs, it will bring that out. So it's definitely still in a league higher than my tube amps, even though they're getting to a very good quality. But I feel that all the ingredients, materials in the tube amp is still translating into better sound. So it's a very useful speaker. It's not too large, and to be honest, I personally really like having an audiophile PA thing, so something that can really fill your room really easily with sound and just fill the room with vibration, like not with vibration, but you know, with energize the air in the room. So, and this thing does that very effectively for a size that is much more friendly. So I'm really digging this thing. So anyway, I hope you liked this video. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for my next videos. Subscribe if you haven't, and you like these type of topics. And yeah, I have had this for a week, and I'll report back to it in the future, and I'll report back when I get the new compression driver. Until then, take care, have a good week, and I'll hope to catch you shortly. Bye bye.